This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andy Steele, and today I'm going to be joined in the co-host chair by Jeff Long. He's been a guest on this show several times in the past. Always great things to talk about he does, and so I thought I would, instead of talking to myself this evening about the latest news and headlines related to 9/11 Truth, I thought I'd open it up to some of his commentary because he's got a lot to share. And indeed, we do have a lot to talk about, a lot of things going on. So before I open up the floor, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that beginning now. And that is 10 seconds. So without any further ado, I want to welcome my co-host for this episode, Jeff. Jeff, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Dankeschön.
So a lot to talk about, and I guess I'm going to start off with some recent news coverage that this show has gotten in the last week or so. The interview with Jeremy Sagan, all over several blogs. Gizmodo picked up on it. Raw Story wrote an article, even on Fox News Radio's website. So I consider that the big time when Fox News sneers at you. I consider that an honor. If Fox News is not happy with something that I'm doing, then I've really accomplished a lot. That's something that is going to have to be mentioned in the obituary someday. But in all seriousness, it amazes me how much attention this generated. I mean, I figured it would attract attention within 9/11 Truth. I figured there'd be a lot of people very excited that Lynn Margulis' son and Carl Sagan's son came out for a new investigation, talked about the evidence on that show with me. It was a really good show. But the fact that, quote-unquote, mainstream networks, corporate networks, even bothered to cover this really shows how scared they are whenever a big-name person comes out and talks about this evidence. Now, Jeff, I sent out some of those articles for you to look at. So we're going to start talking about the Gizmodo article. And in my opinion, I think this was a pretty nasty article. I don't think that anybody would disagree with me. Even people who aren't on the side of 9/11 Truth can't help but notice how hostile this author was. What was your take on this article?
Well, apart from the negative attributes that people are applying to you, going on the attack, what's the quote most often used? You know you're over the target once you start getting flack. And I was wondering compared to what we just went through recently with the Super Bowl and USA Today, Washington Post, I can't remember the other paper that was covering it, and they actually went down to ASU and interviewed one of the 9/11 Truth groups down there. But if you read through those articles, and there's anybody out there that went through the tweets and went to those article links that were up on the AE Facebook page and not on Twitter, those were a lot more, those were actually favorable. Those weren't, of course they were digging a little bit, but they didn't have the venom in the teeth talking about the Super Bowl coach being a 9/11 truther. And then you see the negativity applied from this on the Carl Sagan's side of things here with his son. And I think that you can kind of tell what's a little bit more important. It's one thing when you have bread and circus being played out and you have a football coach asking questions. But when you have somebody who is related to, the most famous scientist and astronomer from our age range, I think that's cutting a little bit too close and too quick. It's again, one thing to go from a Super Bowl coach, he's just a football player, a lot of people are going to say, as opposed to Carl Sagan's son, who is also the son of Lynn Margulis, and she was the National Science, the award that she received during the Clinton administration, National Science Award for the nation, whatever it was. That's cutting a little bit too close to home with people that are scientists and actually can look at some information and tell the difference of what's going on, as opposed to a football player. It's pretty easy to knock somebody down like him in the media, or should something come out from that. But if you compare, the football coach compared to the Sagan family, with the three of them, you can see why, at least in my take on it, is why they're going on the attack, and why they didn't really with surrounding the Super Bowl and everything else that was going on with it. So I don't know if you've thought of it that way, or even compared that from what you read in the articles as this stuff was coming out. So I don't know, what's your take?
Well, it's hard for me to get into the heads of what people are doing, and what's strange, though, is that the media all seems to do the same thing generally. You mentioned the football. You mentioned how people back in a couple months ago were talking about the Super Bowl coach Pete Carroll, and how he questioned 9/11, and they were almost happy to treat it like a cute little hobby at that point, like it was not important, like it was just some kind of quirk of his. And you see, they did this with Ed Asner a couple of years ago, and mainly I think because the media would look bad going after Ed Asner. It would look like it would be bad form. Somebody who's an accomplished actor, older person, for them to attack him. So they just said, Ed Asner's, I forgot the word they used. Ornery or something to that effect, almost like, it's just wacky Ed Asner talking about physics and common sense. But I remember a couple of years ago, there was another football player. I actually wrote a couple of articles about this, called Richard Mendenhall. Anybody that wants to find that article, I think it's called The Public Image Execution of Richard Mendenhall. And then I had another article that was deliberately long, calling out all the sports writers touting their phony outrage. And man, they pretty much crucified this guy. Richard Mendenhall had tweeted out some things when Osama bin Laden was allegedly killed on May 1st, 2011. I use that word allegedly with italics. But he tweeted out something about how everybody was celebrating the death of a person, and then he said something like, we never even fully got the full story of what happened to those towers. And so the media, everybody went after him. The machine started working. And again, that was brutal. So I think the media goes through mood swings. I think around the time of the Super Bowl, they can find it okay to treat that like a quirk when they feel like 9/11 truth is on its way out. But then you get somebody with some credentials, the name behind him, like Jeremy Sagan. His father was Carl Sagan, and that hits a little bit close to home for some people. There's a lot of people who consider themselves skeptics, who have someone like Carl Sagan as their hero, and I don't know. It's just it takes a little from their esteem, I guess, because they look up to people like Carl Sagan. That's what I think is going on. I don't know. I'm glad that Jeremy Sagan has spoken out. I feel terrible that people have written these articles, but as the line goes from the movie JFK, you can't blame pigs for oinking. This is what they do. And then we have this Raw Story article, which was generally really good. My only objection to it was that they misquoted me. All right? And I guess this is my fault for inventing terms like instinctive evidence, even though I know that instincts are not evidence. And I've qualified that, but I guess using the word evidence is is not very wise of me, because people will just draw that out and ignore everything else you said. I never said during the show that I rely on instinctive evidence. I qualified that it's not evidence. I said there's just a feeling you have, and then when you actually look at the real evidence, the 105 feet of free fall, the extreme temperatures, the nanothermite in the dust, then you know we are being lied to. The author decided to just kind of pick that out and say I just relied on instinctive evidence, like I'm just sitting here saying, well, I just think it was a controlled demolition. I just got this feeling in my gut, and that's why I do this show every day for 3 years and do all this work with AE 9/11 Truth, because there's just something in my gut that tells me that. Nothing else, just that. That's the image that they're putting in people's heads. So, it's and that part is sloppy journalism, but overall the Raw story was good, and I think it brought a lot of exposure to the issue. What'd you think?
Well, try to remember when they pull something out like that and they stick it in an article, that they're fishing for something negative to use, and that is very nitpicky. And if you're looking at a full investigation, you have really good detectives on the case. They're going through all the evidence, but then instincts do kick in on interviews and what they're getting from people. So I wouldn't say that it's maybe in certain context, something like that, they could pull out, or it might just seem strange. But I'm not bothered by instincts. It's those instincts to know that right off the bat, hearing the government's official conspiracy theory, those instincts kick in where you're just going, sorry, that's bullshit. Somebody's making something up here, and they've got too many things lined up. They're ready with the story from the get-go. So I wouldn't bother with that one too much. And the fact that it was a better article, I think that we've run around and seen what's going on in the media, that with the ebb and flow, sometimes some journalist with a sympathetic editor can actually get something out, but they can't completely write a positive fluff piece about something for what we're investigating when it comes to 9/11 research, because it just wouldn't get played, it wouldn't get published, wouldn't get past most of the higher senior editors, and that sounds more like what you can get from that kind of story, as opposed to the other attacks out there. This happened similarly several years ago, back when I lived in Washington, D.C., publishing, one of the editors for the Rock Creek Free Press, and we published for 6 years. That was a 8-page broadsheet newspaper that we had on display, about 70 different metro stops around the city, with all, with the Washington Post, that CIA front piece, and every other printed news piece for the area based around with all the bureaus in Washington, D.C. So we had far reach on something like that. So we had on the front page something about 9/11, some story that came out at that time. I can't remember what it was now. It was so many years ago. But the local Drive News in the afternoon picked it up, I think. The big one in the afternoon from drive time, I think, from like 3 to 6. And it was one of the, like ESPN or something, one of the large broadcast stations. And they took the story and read it verbatim, just saying, look how crazy these people are. And he's basically saying, I quote, and he reads through the whole article and said, let me get that to you people again, how crazy they are. And he reads the full article again, and it was nothing but a positive story. I think about some other people in the mainstream or celebrities doing something regarding getting 9/11 out there. And it was several people, the group had heard the live broadcast. But this guy took DC airtime to air this out and said, this is a crazy newspaper. It's printed right there, right next to the rest of the stuff that's out there. you can see it. You can go pick it up and read it for yourself. It's online. And something like that would come across as a soft hit piece, but the guy read the article twice over the air with, all the military-industrial complex contractors, all the government people listening, all the spooks in the area, everybody else. And it was a way for him to, slight it a little bit, but then he read the article word for word. So he was able to get that information out there. If he would have just come on the air saying, I think these guys are right, what they're talking about here in this article, he wouldn't have the job after that. But I think that we do have some sympathetic people out there in the media, because you can't have that large of a grouping, an organization of people going to journalism school that they can't all buy up on and just read the scripts. I think that because we know that for the most part that's what all the left wing and right wing news agencies that are out there that are all owned by the same families and military industrial complex contracting companies out there. That's why you get the same message going back and forth, and then you have these fake fights. I mean, it's the same thing that you would see between Republicans and Democrats. When I'd see it happening on the steps and in the halls back in D.C., you'd see them fight in public on the air. As soon as they were done, they were going behind closed doors, eating at the same private clubs, picking up their kids at the same private schools that they go together, and going to the same private parties. So they've got the fight for us out here in the front, but when they're behind closed doors, they're doing their own thing. And what we went over before, and the Mockingbird piece that we talked about, and the CIA control and manipulation of the media since the mid 40s, that hasn't left. It's just a little bit different. The game's different, and you don't have to give everybody the script on what not to talk about as a journalist. I don't know, maybe some people just don't realize that you can have an army of journalists out there, but it's the editors of these news stations, whether print or broadcast, radio, TV, that decide what's going to get on the air. They're the ones that are getting the marching orders, being told what can and cannot be done. Whether it's coming from the corporations controlling government or the agency influence coming back and forth. And that's stuff that I was involved in way back in the day during the Cold War. So at least I know a little something about it. I'm not just talking off the cuff, but these journalists, they're not going to be able to, they're self-regulating, I guess is my point, is that at that area, they're just not going to talk about certain things because they know that they can't get it published, and it's going to get them canned, and they're not going to get any work.
A big fallacy that I think people follow when they immediately dismiss people like you and me talking about 9/11 controlled demolition evidence, talking about control of the media, how it's kept muzzled in many cases, is this idea that everybody is in lockstep, that there's this machine of robot slaves out there, like in some children's cartoon on Saturday morning, and that you have one master and everybody's walking in lockstep. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. A lot of it is self-censorship. People keeping a lid on their own suspicions and forcing themselves to do that phony chuckle when somebody talks about the nanothermite in the dust or the 105 feet of free fall, because that's what's expected of them. I've said this before, the high school mentality doesn't change just because you get gray hair. Because when you become an adult, money gets involved. Your career gets involved. And, man, you got a career you've worked hard for decades. You put all that time into it. People don't want to let it go. And so they ask themselves, is 9/11 worth it? Can they do anything about it? There's a lot of people who come to that conclusion that they can't. that it's not worth it, that it's over and done with and in the past, and let's move forward. And they may even assure themselves that they're going to do something about the next big thing, or they're going to prevent the post 9/11 world from getting out of control. Right, but I don't know. I don't see our media establishment doing that. You know, you talk about things that bleed through every once in a while. I kind of look at it like glitches in a video game. You know that experience when you're playing Nintendo as a kid, and then Super Mario jumps into a certain area, and then all of a sudden his feet are above his head. You're like, hey, that's pretty cool. I'm going to try to make that happen again, and you just can never seem to do it. But every once in a while, it happens. It's like you take note of it, and so every once in a while,
glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, and so every once in a while you get some real news. I remember when I was on my local news back on the 10th anniversary when I spoke in front of the federal building, the courthouse/federal building, and they used to run the half-hour news at 5 o'clock, 5:30, and 6, and then you got the NBC news, the national news at 6:30. And so they interviewed me. I kept the camera on myself. Again, they didn't go into any evidence. They just used a clip of me saying, if you watch it on YouTube, you can see for yourself. It looks like a controlled demolition, something to that effect. But that's okay. It came out good. I didn't turn my camera off. I think that's part of the reason, and I got the full interview on YouTube before it ran. But they ran the story about me out there at 5 o'clock, and then at 5:30, we were waiting to see it again, and it was done. It was all the same news, except that the story about my event there out in front of the federal building was gone. And I don't know what happened. It was like, you get your one shot to see this. We're going to lift the blanket for one moment. We're going to let you have one peek at some real news for a moment, but that's all you're getting. It's just an interesting and amazing phenomenon, because things come out and then you hear about it and then it's gone immediately after. And what you talk about when you're saying about people holding up a letter and saying, can you believe they said this? Use for an example, they think that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. Let me repeat. Building 7 was a controlled demolition. Almost like they're trying to get the information out there. Now, I'm not going to... I really don't think the author of the Gizmodo article was trying to get my information, my show out there to the general public by posting the YouTube video in it. Raw story, who knows? I don't know. But you notice that in both of those articles, they did post the YouTube video. Fox News didn't. Fox News only posted a piece of the original Gizmodo article, I believe. But they didn't put the show in their page, and it might be because we make fun of him in that. I mean, Jeremy Sagan essentially says, don't watch that crap, referring to Fox News. And maybe they don't want people to know about the show because we talk about how Bill O'Reilly... I don't know. I mean, I'm presuming a lot here. But you notice that they didn't want to talk about it that much. They just wanted to get ridicule in and not go into it any deeper. But I think that is an amazing phenomenon whenever you find those moments that you have a little glitch in the matrix and some real news comes forward. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, I talked about this in the last couple of weeks. The shift in the media post 9/11. And I don't know if it was really a shift or if I just noticed it more. But I noticed that the media became more hostile. It became more focused on consolidating control over people's perceptions after 9/11. I mean, it always had some bit of control before, but after 9/11, it just seemed that there was an agenda, and they were going to keep people's focus. They had people's focus, and they were going to keep it. I used the example of a celebrity that criticized Bush for using or for listing Iraq in the axis of evil, and Fox News didn't just go after the celebrity for what he said. They went after everything about this man. They tore apart his personal life, his history with depression. I mean, stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with the issue at hand. And it just got nastier. Now, from what you've observed, do you feel that there was any kind of policy shift in the media, or that it became more focused, or has it always generally been this way, and maybe I just noticed it more after 9/11? Jeff?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was a mute button issue. But getting back to what I was saying to nobody, except for the NSA in the background, because they can hear over the mute, those kind of control mechanisms have always been in the media. We've got certain people that are near and dear to our hearts, people that we grew up with, that I think that most people would be kind of surprised had ties to government intelligence and backgrounds with that. But I think that there are just certain times that either they're just letting, you've got the fight going back and forth. I think that probably most people are under the idea that the government being infiltrated with criminal elements and creating these kind of false flag scenarios, bringing us to war, that they're working for one group, and it's, you've got many hands in the pot. You've got different mafia families competing, for control mechanisms that work together for a certain project, where they all benefit from it, but they have no problem taking each other out at any other time and trying to gain control because they all want to be king of the hill. They're all bucking for control and being the main ringleader. So you see this kind of stuff going back and forth in the media, and what I've seen is that they seem to go on the hunt for government crime at certain points and allow that to be exposed, and there are plenty of people that get sacrificed that way. I mean, you saw what came out with what happened in the 80s with Iran-Contra. But as this stuff is coming out, I mean, there's so much of it to cover. It's almost, I guess, maybe like a release valve. And I think that is what we get with the internet and alternative media, is that without something like that, without people being able to vent, get their frustrations out, we would have a lot bigger, well, we wouldn't have, I don't think, the problems, but the people behind the government criminals would have a lot to fear, having a population that's bottled up and ready to pop over something. If you let them vent, blow off steam, highly entertain them, then you can get more done. And with the media side, at certain points, you see how they let some of that stuff out and seem like they're being real journalists, and then it flips around again, and then they just become the attack dogs. There's just certain things that they will not touch in a positive light. So there's some sort of like ebb and flow, but there's something behind it, whether the controllers, the people running the editors and getting the information out. And people tend to forget too that how much information is out there. And before we went so heavy with the internet, even what you're seeing in the printed news and on TV news, you're seeing like a fraction of a percent of what is actually coming through the news wires on a daily basis. So even on a good day, if they were all playing nice and wanted to actually report on real news, they have to pick and choose what's out there that they think is going to work in that slotted frame of time to get the news out, and at the same time keep the advertisers happy, and at the same time not report negatively on those advertisers and their products. So it kind of cuts both ways. I mean, you might see it something different, but coming from my background and the stuff that was going on during the Cold War, it was just it was definitely different, and seeing how the opposition works from their side of the fence. Very calculated, and they're very paranoid, and they definitely want to control as much as they can. So it just seems that as things are going right now, we're losing more and more of it when it comes from the journalistic side and what they're doing with the internet. and going on that attack, especially with what the FCC is being tasked to do now, regulate the internet.
And I want to get to that in a minute. I just want to ask you this question, though. And this goes a little bit beyond the controlled demolition evidence, but I think it relates because it all is heaped on the big pile of BS that we have to crawl through to get anybody to look at this evidence. I've been hearing people talk about unconstitutional things that Obama is doing, and people say, why don't you just impeach him? You heard this during Bush's administration, too, so I'm not being partisan here, and during the last years. And in the last 2 years of both administrations, you heard people say, well, it's too late to impeach this person. It would take too much time. And I don't know, I don't believe that, but they also talk about people at high positions of banking and big business who are too big to jail. And I just wonder, where have we gone? I mean, during Iran-Contra, Reagan had to testify, I believe. And you don't see that now with Obama. You see attitudes like, well, we can't do anything to him. We can't impeach him because it would take too long, or we don't. And I don't believe that that we would just let a president. I mean, what if he was guilty of murder or something? We'd just be like, oh well, it's 2 years. It would take too long to impeach. And so, why am I going into all of this right now? My question to you is, do you think that we've become a more fearful society? I personally look around and I hear people say things to me about, oh, you're probably on a list somewhere. Like there's this big list in the sky with my name on it. And, I don't worry about it. I don't let that stop me. But people do. People have iced their own free speech. People are more fearful, in my view. And they're more afraid to go after power. Even the people who have some power, or allegedly have some power, like congressmen. Do you think we've become more afraid as Americans now in the modern day?
I think that that's the plan. At least that's you can see that from the modus operandi of the people behind the 9/11 crime and the people that they control in the U.S. government and corporations. With all the fear messaging and the hype they do through all the mainstream media sources getting out there. You remember the terror alerts, the Sesame Street color bar, and how ridiculous that was. But they do that with how they instituted TSA and what we go through at the airport. That's ratcheting up fear. At the same time, trying to see how much the population will take based off of the limited information that they have on an alleged crime or terrorist act. And everybody, always forgets it. 9/11 was a crime; should have been investigated that way. But they use the terror meme, and then that gets everybody in under that umbrella, so that they can run these control mechanisms and get everybody agitated. And then that's where they give the bread and circus side with entertainment to let people blow off the steam. While they're agitating them, they got to make sure that they don't take it too far to where they actually have everybody pop at the wrong time, and next thing you know, you have some sort of revolution in the streets. But you can't, if you regulate that release with what they're doing. I mean, they're traumatizing the U.S. population. My friends in Europe, they're just amazed at what Americans will put up with, especially coming from the media and their government. They just can't believe that that they're buying into this. And the fear mechanisms that you're talking about, I call it fear porn, and there's a couple people in the alternative media that use fear porn on a daily basis to get their base agitated to follow them and buy their products. Buy my video. But the part of what you're talking about in this fear indoctrination, and sounds so much like East Germany, with the Stasi and what they were doing with their population. That they're sort of creating a snitch society. People agitated enough to where if you see something, say something, and based off of what? The average person has no idea. Looking at a situation, for the most part, having no training on what terrorism is supposed to look like or something shady that's going on. So they get everybody agitated that way. And the stuff that's come out with all the mass surveillance, that kind of shows that people are pissed off, but not enough to where they're actually really doing anything about it. That part's obvious, that the release valve for that kind of tension is open wide enough that people are just allowing it. And, that just amazes me. If the Constitution is supposed to be real and all the amendments there, people seem to don't care about it much at all. And they don't even think about the other areas of surveillance. They don't. It's one thing to think that you're on a watch list, which we all are. We're all being watched and surveilled by the most paranoid government we've ever had up to this point. I think out of 227 years, we've something like that. We've had 222 years of war. Since our inception. We've been at war since the beginning, and most Americans don't know that and don't ask. If they find out about it, they wouldn't ask really why. What around the world have been for so long, controlling and shooting other people. But with the surveillance side and what's going on with the NSA overreach, and they're the big ears. They're not the only one on the planet that does that, but they have the most funding and the biggest technology for doing so. And so does Israel, because of what they've been able to get from the U.S. over the decades. But we've got these fusion centers that nobody ever talks about. These are localized intelligence gathering centers where you have local police, sheriffs, CIA working in there, Homeland Security, TSA type. It's just an amalgamation, a little bit of everybody, and you can't get that information on what it is that that they have on you in your file. So you have all these areas where, yeah, most of it's true what's going on, but they're trying to scare you with it and scare you with the other side that ISIS is the bad guy, the new boogeyman to look out for, but don't pay attention to any of us that pass these laws and these bills in the middle of the night and won't allow you or the people voting on it access to the actual document to see what it is that they're voting on and about to implement as law. That's the creepy part. So fear porn is out there, and they're trying to ratchet up everybody's fears, but I personally do not care about. I have to laugh at how much they're being surveilled, because they can't stand that. They can't stand the laughter. They don't like being made fun of. No bully likes being made fun of.
That's right. And what you're talking about with the internet, they've gotten us so hooked to it. I remember being in college and having a computer in your dorm room was sort of a luxury. It was something that you wanted to think about before you actually committed to it. It was better to just go to the computer lab at that time, because the only reason you really needed to have a computer was to do your homework. I was trying to be a writer too, so that's why I had one for a semester. But beyond that, for your average person, average student, there was no reason to have a computer in your room. You go to the computer lab, get your stuff done there, and then go home to your dorm and party, And so things have changed so much. And you see the society losing touch with each other. You see people more willing to go purchase something on Amazon than drive down to any of the zillions of stores that we have. When I say zillions of stores, I mean most of them are Walmart or Target, but drive down to these places and just buy the same thing. More willing to write a text to somebody than either pick up the phone and call them or go to their house and talk to them in person. We're getting more distance from each other. So we're more dependent on the internet. They've got us all hooked to the internet. I mean, I'm hooked to the internet. I'm bad with this too. Obviously need the internet to do this show and do my work with AE 911 Truth. Now we're seeing moves towards regulating the internet. And whenever they talk about regulating, you better hold on to your hats because it's going to be more than just regulating. Now, you know a lot more about this than I do, so I'm going to give you the floor to talk about this. But this affects us, folks, because 911 Truth was born on the internet, and unless we start taking it to the streets, start taking it to the real world, it could die on the internet too. I mean, there will always be people talking about this, but we can't become so reliant. But Jeff, I want you to talk about the latest step towards internet regulation going on right now.
Well, I'm not even sure. How many people out there with everything else that's going on even knows that the FCC is now taking control of it, and they're going to turn it into a utility. In the fact that the U.S. government is able to come in and take control of something that's supposed to be open for the world, between the ARPANET and CERN, creating this thing, it's supposed to be a resource exchanging information, but that all comes with a price tag, and it's the same thing if you boil it down to something close to social media, something like Facebook. The fact that they have so many people addicted to it that I can't remember the latest profit figure that Facebook had posted. But we're talking billions, and this is Facebook. This is people getting online, talking back and forth, posting stuff about their family, a lot of times inappropriate things about family and loved ones, and it's a place where people will say something digitally in the online world that they would never say face to face to somebody else. There's that kind of disconnect that they're building, and when they give you something like that kind of data mining tool, and if people looked into the background of how Facebook was actually set up and not the story movie version, they would have some serious questions about what they're doing online and social media and posting stuff out there. But it's free. And people need to remember that it's free. And the amount of people behind it that are employed to work it as a business and the massive profit model that it has, they're going to get people addicted. These are the new forms of drugs. These are like digital drugs. You can think of it that way. And the bigger picture with the internet is taking control. Once they pull something from the people, and this has been a relief valve for quite some time, but regulating it, I don't understand how anybody could hear that word, like you were saying, and look at the government's history. Anytime the government has ever stepped in to help, it has always gone horribly, horribly wrong. It always gets worse. And if you're regulating something that's supposed to be a free speech tool, that can never, ever be a good thing. We've got, there's another part of it with ICANN, who registers and regulates domain names and DNS. They're, I think it's this year, looking to turn that over to whichever country wants it. And that's basically like turning over the global post office to whoever is the biggest bidder, and then it's going to figure out how to route your information in your mail. And if they don't like you, they turn off your address, and then nobody can find your information. And that doesn't bode well for what you were talking about earlier. AE is a web-based organization getting information out to the masses, as opposed to like a large corporate office building where stuff is going on. basically everything we do globally is online. And now we have this mechanism coming in here that we just had recently with Facebook. They're making it available for people to tag something as being fake news, and by doing that, again, that's just having any random person being able to go, I don't think that's real, mark it, and then it builds up in the database and the algorithms for Facebook, and then they remove it from the feeds, so they can easily start targeting our information to where it doesn't get out. We have a hard enough time getting the information out to most people online to go as furthest as we can, and then we're up against that kind of wall of corporations working with government, seeing any kind of dissent or questioning, where they start turning off mechanisms that work for us. And once the internet starts getting so mangled up and run through the FCC ringer, it's just, it's pretty much dead at that point. The idea of them regulating anything, it's pretty much a done deal, and it won't bode well for what you're doing. For the stuff that I do with all the social media that I manage across the board, so many Facebook pages, the Twitter accounts, all the other social media outlets, it'll just die on the vine as it turns around. And if anybody's paying attention, as far as the way that they're ratcheting up everything towards this next global war, I mean, that's what it's feeling like. We just had all these journalists quit, get caught in scandal, or die off in strange cases within weeks of each other. We had a mass culling of journalists, and those are probably the few that would kind of report on something that's going on, or might not be able to bite their tongue when they start getting the memos on what they're having to report on. But when you see something like that, that's rearranging the decks, the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, and that is not good. That's a large sign something's coming, and not to ratchet up fear, but this is more palpable and real. Something like a global conflict, and now that they're putting the screws to the internet and alternative media, and trying to demonize what we do, and specifically getting back to you and your point with the Sagan piece, to make you look fringy and weird to the outside world with these hit pieces, is how they're going to steer people away from what we're talking about and real information, what's actually going on, so that they can really cripple that side of the internet, because the alternative media is the new media. So what we do, and it's all internet-based and easy and accessible, and we can post them anywhere from this goofy little 2-inch screen phone that I'm talking on right now, and post something instantly as far as real news, and not go through the controlled vetting process of the dinosaur dying mainstream media. So they're on their way out from being extinct. So you can see why they're attacking this side, wanting to control the internet. Obama has hated the internet, never liked it, just because the information people were able to dig up on him and put out there. Bush probably doesn't even know what the internets are. Who knows? So they're strangling that side for what we do. Something big is coming down the pipeline, and they've got to have their mainstream media be the source that people are going to get whatever story it is that they're going to push out. So that's a roundabout way of getting back to what they were actually doing to you and some of these hit pieces. So. Well,
what's amazing is that they jumped on this latest interview, but they didn't cover the William Binney interview. And I mean, that's huge. NSA Tech, I sent the link to Drudge Report.
Yeah. was all over the place. That was probably your highest viewed or listened to piece. I mean, an NSA whistleblower coming out and talking about that, but here they have to control the celebrity side of things with the Sagan family. Can't have that coming out.
No, and I mean, it's like they have to evaluate each different character and determine what their strategy is going to be. In the case of William Binney, because he had such a high position at one point, they must have made a decision that we don't want to give any attention to this whatsoever. And I tried to actually get that link out to Drudge. I mean, Drudge is a big news aggregator. I mean, nobody other than the alternative media, which is really the mainstream media now, covered it. Now, I wanted to make sure here in our last 5 minutes that we cover this, and we almost did forget, but we have an event coming up called Spring Rising, an anti-war intervention in D.C., and it's going to be this weekend, more specifically on... Oh, let's see. I don't have the date. From March 18th.
Actually, it starts Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday.
Starts tomorrow.
Well, we're recording this on Tuesday, so actually it will have started by the time this airs on No Lies Radio, but it will still be going on. Cindy Sheehan's going to be there. It says, oppose the world police state, DC Days of Resistance, Spring Uprising. A lot of groups involved. AE 9/11 Truth put out an alert to all of its supporters about this. So if you're out in DC, please come. Great people involved. Cindy Sheehan, antiwar.com I saw as one of the groups endorsing this. So many different peace groups and whatnot. But you notice, too, they're going to be doing it in March. And March, traditionally, in the post-9/11 world...
Ides of March.
The Ides of March. It's been the time that wars have started. I believe, yes, the Iraqi war and the Libyan war, I call it a war, the bombing campaign, both started, I believe, on the same day, or roughly close to the same day. I don't remember which day it was off the top of my head. But... what do you think about this? They use this term Spring Rising as 4 days of creative resistance. What to you is creative resistance? What's so good about getting together at an anti-war rally in D.C.?
I've always hated them. I went to several. It's basically like, everybody coming to D.C. and physically getting together on a Facebook page known as the National Mall, hanging out, protesting, and then leaving and going back to the hotel and going, wasn't that great? How we affected so much change, and let's go to Starbucks now and get some horribly priced and nasty tasting coffee. Sorry about that. I guess you're not going to get that Starbucks endorsement for your radio show, but the anti-war movement, and I lived in D.C. for 8 years, and went down in front of the White House and put out all of this information from so many different angles on 9/11, trying to inform not government officials, but the tourists that were coming by. And so we'd have our banners out there, and we did that for quite some time. But the anti-war movement was never anything more than an anti-Bush movement at the time. Being a Bush-Cheney problem and with the wars that were going on. And then as soon as Obama came in, they went to sleep. And they thought everything was fine and good, and so an anti-war movement can't be if the Bush regime, comes in after 9/11 creating two massive wars, and then the Nobel Peace Prize winning president comes in on the leftist side and expands it to 11 wars. And again, it gets back to how long America's been at war around the world. This and like what we sent out the other day, trying to get everybody together for the local AE 9/11 Truth Action Group is, it's in these endless wars and educate the protesters. And that's the one thing. If they just figured it out from all those different angles, from all the different clubs that are out there, everybody's got to pitch a tent and get there and be a part of their group where they feel comfortable going, I can protest this area. This is good enough for this area of anti-war. Everybody has their factions. But if they saw it as all coming about because of 9/11 and what's actually going on, what they're talking about, then they'd be able to end it pretty quick. And and some of the other people listening just get it that exposing the crime of what happened on that day and with all the people involved, all the people that are stuck in their protected places in government that were there and available that day to be a part of this operation, for all the stand downs and everything else that went on. We wouldn't be in these wars if people figured it out that buildings just do not collapse and commit suicide like that in the middle of an afternoon. You get it about 9/11, and then the anti-war thing is just kind of a given. So it's, that's the hardest thing that ever did around there, and dealing with the fervor of the anti-war movement was trying to get them on board with bringing on some major investigators within the 9/11 research movement to have them on there and explaining the side of the position. And it's controlled, just like the rest of the stuff and what we were talking about with the media. Never saw so many agent provocateurs, federal infiltrators, the assets, the government trolls, the corporate intelligence coming in and trying to make sure that they manipulate the movement as best as possible, because you can't let it get out of control and actually really stop these wars. So, it's really important that anybody in that area, especially if you're into 9/11 and that kind of research and want to expose it for what it is, then you live in that area, you need to be out there at any of these anti-war rallies and making sure that these people understand the bigger picture, because that's what it is.
And we are going to have to leave it there. This has been a great hour. Great having you on, Jeff. You are definitely going to be back on this show. But thanks for coming on. And folks, remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele with Jeff Long saying have a good night and good luck.